Okay, this is an experiment. I have taped to my chest a microphone. Should we test it? Let's see if it keeps working over here or over here. Okay, we're all right. So, thank you, gentlemen, for this device. So hopefully no cutting out. Now, I come from a town called Lewes in East Sussex. And Lewes is known really for two things. Number one, every November the 5th, it goes completely crazy. It is well known for having the biggest bonfire night celebrations in the world. And of course, what they're commemorating is the biggest conspiracy theory of all time, which Tony referred to earlier on, i.e. the gunpowder plot. And for reasons too complex to go into today, Lewes' reason has kept that commemoration going for many years. So it's a bit subversive. Lewes seems to breed slightly subversive people, or the technical term, nutters. But it's also famous for one of its residents who lived there for a few years. One of those residents was a man called Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine was very much a subversive, a bit of a rebel. He began his career making corsets, by the way. People forget this, making corsets. Then he was a customs and excise man, and a very bad one at that. And anyway, after years going by, he basically became very involved in political agitation and became very well known for helping to inspire the American War of Independence. And then his words were used, if not directly part of, to be involved with the whole French Revolution thing. Now, some people lump Thomas Paine in with the whole kind of mysterious global agenda. Maybe he was one of those perpetrating it. But I personally don't believe that's true. When you look at him, he was actually too much of a wild card. And in fact, in the French Revolution, he wound up being locked away for nearly a year and only escaped with his life by a smidgen of chance. So basically, he was too subversive, even for the subversives. But this quote here is a good one, and this is really worth remembering. In his many writings, Thomas Paine wrote, "The long act of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right." And that's, I think, very true. We get used to things, and we treat them as the norm. That becomes the mainstream. But that doesn't mean it's correct. Just because we all know something and we've heard about it for a long, long time doesn't make it the real McCoy. And with that in mind, I mind that Thomas Paine, of course, is just one of many people who has challenged the establishment. What I want to look at today is, how does all this global conspiracy theory glue together? And are there any hidden aspects to it that we're not talking about? Now, in Tony's presentation, you heard some of the more esoteric connections, the secret societies, their beliefs, the religious undercurrents of some of this. And that, I think, is very important, and I think it all glues this together far more than people may know. What I want to do today is to present to you a variation of a presentation that I've actually been giving quite far and wide. Now, I'm lucky enough through harmless things like crop circles, which are not harmless at all, of course, but we think they are pretty little things we can easily dismiss. Well, I've been researching explained, or rather unexplained, mysteries for many years now. And crops are a perfect example of something that everybody thinks explained, load of rubbish, men with planks of wood, garden rollers, that's all there is to it. But then when you look at the evidence, you realize that no matter how many may be made that way, there's always a significant proportion that you simply cannot explain so simply. So this has led me over the years into wanting to get to the bottom of other unexplained mysteries. And the global agenda that we're all talking about here this weekend is a mystery. Because the problem is we don't really know what's going on. We can stand here, we can, have theories, and I can come up with a hypothesis, but that's what it is. And here's the problem. Convincing people in the outside world that anything's going on is very difficult without direct evidence. And what you have to do for normal people is give them direct evidence. So I spent many years giving talks to the WI, Rotary clubs, Probus clubs, telling people about crop circles, and as the years have gone by, increasingly other things. And I'm lucky, because now I've kind of got onto the circuit. I can start to talk about things like this, and they can't stop me, because they've invited me. But I also know what it is they need to hear to be convinced, and speculation doesn't do it. You've got to give them something more real. And there are certain areas of conspiracy theory you have to go into that they can all relate to. And I'm going to try and look at some of these areas today. Some of the more mainstream things, and yet not really mainstream, and glue it together with all the other stuff that we've been speaking about today. And the problem is, when you try to talk about conspiracy theory, or truth-seeking, as it increasingly seems to become known these days, when you try to talk about that in the mainstream, what happens? Did anybody see The One Show weeks ago? There is the BBC One programme, The One Show, and myself, Marcus Allen from Nexus magazine, and John Wickham, paranormal investigator, we were asked to come and film an interview for The One Show. So Kelvin Mackenzie, ex-editor of The Sun, interviewed us, and we had this fabulous 2-hour discussion sitting in a hotel, very nice. They filmed it, and we discussed everything from 9/11 to the war on terror, global conspiracy, the whole shebang. Now, I knew, because I've done TV before and we know what it's like, I knew it would be edited. What I wasn't quite ready for was, when the final program was broadcast, that all that remained of our 2-hour discussion was 25 seconds, and that was it. And then they cut back to the studio and Kelvin Mackenzie did his thing. So that's, unfortunately, often all you get. And all I wound up saying was talking about Guy Fawkes being one conspiracy theory everybody accepts in the mainstream. But that was it. It didn't go any further than that. So that's the world we're living in, a world in denial. And yet, when you look at the evidence of all these linked things, everything we're talking about here, you begin to realize there is something that must be properly investigated and, most importantly, spoken about. So we need to look at some things that the public can relate to. Can we prove even one cover-up? If you can prove one cover-up, you've got something that's a little crowbar in the mainstream, and then people will begin to get interested. So, my involvement with unexplained mysteries over the years, I like to use this one. Now, you don't have to believe in any of this. That's not the issue. I'm going to talk for a minute about the Roswell incident. Now, UFOs, tricky subject, all sorts of controversy. I am not going to be concluding anything about what's really going on today, but I do want this as an example of something that has become myth very much in the public mind. Now, for those of you who don't know, 61 years ago, on the 6th of July, 1947, it was reported in the Roswell Daily Record, which some of you can see there, that a flying saucer had been captured. And people reported this craft had landed in the desert or crashed in the desert. What we see here is not a real photograph, it's a mock-up. But this is what people reported. A craft, alien-looking bodies lying on the ground next to it. Now, it didn't take very long for the cover story to arrive, because obviously the authorities didn't want people reporting that flying saucers had crashed. So what happened the next day was that they presented to the public bits of a weather balloon. And they said this was what came down. Here we see Major Jesse Marcel presenting these fragments of a weather balloon to the world's press. That was all there was to it. It's okay, nothing to worry about. Now that's all well and good, apart from the fact that to his dying day, Major Marcel held fast to the reality that he did witness real fragments from a real crashed, unidentified craft. And he showed these fragments at the time to his children, who are still alive today. They also report seeing strange objects with strange symbols on them, a bit of metal with strange properties that seemed like nothing on Earth. And several other people involved in the retrieval of the debris at Roswell said there is no question what came down was not a weather balloon. Now, here's the interesting thing, of course. That hasn't made the myth go away. If anything, the myth has grown over the years. And when people like Stanton Friedman began to question people who'd been at Roswell years later, he began to realize there was a story that simply had not been properly explored. This is the popular view of what was found at Roswell. This is, again, from a film, not the real thing, but this is what many people believe. You know, the typical grey being, the sort of shadowy officials looking in, keeping this all a secret from us, a la the X-Files. And you can believe that or not believe it, that doesn't really matter to today. And I don't know what really happened at Roswell, but here's the thing. The cover story about the weather balloon then changed. And then it changed, and then it was, well, it wasn't a weather balloon. What it was Project Mogul, which was a US floating device that could detect waves from Soviet atomic tests. And you think, well, why didn't they say it was a weather balloon? Or, you know, why are they now changing it? And then, when nurses who were at Roswell at the time began to say, well, we saw bodies, we saw alien, non-human bodies being brought into the hospital, a new explanation was given that all they were crash test dummies. Now, of course, you know, easy to mistake a crash test dummy for a real body. You know, everyone might not. So you see the problem. So in other words, there's definitely something weird about Roswell. We'll now never know what happened. There's too much myth, too much invention. It's become a kind of collective fantasy. But clearly something occurred. Now, the one thing that is a fact is that this place exists. This is Area 51. Now, Area 51 in sort of UFO folklore is where the crashed object was taken. And the idea is that this is a secret military base in the Nevada desert. And the idea is that they're trying to reverse engineer the secrets of this craft so that they can then create their own flying discs and craft like this. So here we are. There are various people who claim to have worked at Area 51 who've come forward as whistleblowers. And of course, they're always written off as mad or liars and all this kind of thing. But here's the thing. Okay. It does exist, but they never officially say what it's for. Although it is just about acknowledged, nobody knows what they're doing. But presumably, they're testing secret weaponry. And certainly, many researchers, particularly in the earlier days, when there was a wider, or rather, there was a less wide perimeter around it, you could get close enough for people to have filmed very strange objects flying over Area 51, performing aerial dynamics beyond the laws of physics, it would seem. So something weird's going on there. Now, in recent years, they've wised up to all this kind of stuff, and they don't want that. So they push the perimeters back. So the nearest you will ever get is about this. You will see the dusty track going off into the desert leading to Area 51. And if you try to go any further than that, what you will see, of course, is this. And they won't let you in. You will be, if you try to go in, as you would, of course, on any military installation. But nonetheless, it goes to show that the fact that they won't talk about what's going on makes you wonder, well, what is it they're not telling us about? Now, here's the thing, right? Roswell aside, which may or may not be true, we don't know. What is true is that strange objects do fly in our skies. They may be military. They may be alien. Don't know. But strange things fly. Now, I, over the years, have spoken to several commercial airline pilots who've all described things that they cannot explain, which they no longer bother to report because it's not worth their while to do so. Okay? So that's quite interesting. They see this stuff, something's going on. We don't know what, but something's going on. Here is one of the black triangles, which was filmed over Belgium in the 80s. Lots of people have seen these. And this is an image, a radar image from the Mexican Air Force. And Mexico is currently the area of the world's biggest UFO flap. More UFOs are now seen over Mexico City than any other place in the world. And these are being videoed by several different people all at the same time. Whole fleets of weird objects hovering over the city. What's going on? I don't know. But something's going on. And the Mexican Air Force are in fact the only official body in the world to have officially recognized the existence of UFOs. Obviously, they don't say what they are, but they do acknowledge that they exist. Now, we have this wonderful thing in the West called the Freedom of Information Act. So you would think this is pretty easy to nail down, okay? If we want to know whether UFOs are really being seen or not, we can simply apply to see the documents which prove that this is the case, okay? And you can. And if you do this, they will release the document. Trouble is, what you get when they release the documents is that. For reasons of national security, we must, of course, withhold all the interesting details you wanted to see. National security, that's a good cover, always used. So they can legally say they've released the documents, but of course they don't have to tell you anything about what you really needed to know. The point of all this is clear evidence of a cover-up. No question. Doesn't matter whether aliens don't exist or not. The fact is, we are not told the truth about UFOs. Okay? Because I know you're all thinking, oh God, I didn't think I was at a paranormal conference. Well, don't worry. We're going to go into some other areas now. But it is an example of something that is clearly covered up. No question about that. So, you then also have to say, well, we're not going to get anything official, so let's talk to the people that claim to have had these close encounter experiences. Now, this couple up here, this is Betty and Barney Hill. And back in 1961, they were the first widely recognized example of alien abduction. And they claimed that they, through hypnotic regression and later counseling, that they'd been taken up on board a ship and shown strange star charts and met these beings. There you see Betty many years later with a model of the being that she claims that she met. And again, we have no idea whether these things really go on, but thousands of cases around the world occur every year. And people like the now sadly deceased John Mack, who was a Harvard professor of psychiatry, spent several years interviewing and analyzing psychologically people who claimed to have had these alien experiences. And what he concluded was this, that as far as these people were concerned, it was real. Okay? Now you can say it just took place in a realm of mind. Did it really happen? Don't know. But as far as they were concerned, it was a real experience, and he became quite convinced of that. Now here's where we go on to the next stage of all this, and it's an important one. One of the recurring tales from supposed alien abductees is that they have been shown visions of the future. Whitney Strieber, who wrote the book Communion some years ago, claimed categorically that he was shown visions of things that would come to pass. John King is another example. There are many people that have been shown global events that would occur. And they were all told that the time you're moving into, i.e. now, where we're living today, is going to be pivotal. A pivotal moment of change for the human race. Big things are going to happen that's going to change everything you ever thought you knew about your world. And this comes up time and time again. Must mean, is it just some weird psychotic fantasy? Well, maybe. But the thing is that these visions, of course, are coming through from lots of other areas. Clairvoyants like Edgar Casey, here, one of the more famous clairvoyants of the early 20th century, have been saying for years, something imminent. It's about to happen. Something big's about to happen to our world. And interestingly, Casey managed to predict accurately both First and Second World Wars and other events besides. Not everything, didn't get everything right, but some things uncannily were correct. And other clairvoyants, psychics, mediums, whatever you think's going on, there's an interesting rate of success in prediction. It's not fail-safe, it's very often wrong, but some things are uncannily right. And what they all say is, get ready, something huge is about to happen. So here we are, living in these times where that something huge seems to be around the corner. Now here's the thing. Of course, religion is crammed full of prophecy of the future. Now, you heard Tony earlier on talking about the book of Revelation. Many people hold that the book of Revelation is a prediction of these end times, as they're being called now. Now, where I differ from Tony is that I don't necessarily see belief in this as a good thing. I see it personally as part of the problem. That's not to say the prophecies are wrong. They may be right. But what I would say is that when you have a lot of people that believe the end of the world is nigh, somewhere down the line, psychologically, surely you're helping to bring that about. And is that what we really want? Or can the changes that we need in this world be brought about by different measures? So let's see. Here we see the three children at Fatima. This is an example of a more modern religious prophecy. Let's put aside the Bible. What about modern religious prophecy of change? In 1917, in Fatima, these three children had visions of this glowing lady who announced herself finally as Our Lady of the Rosary. There are tales of apparitions of the Virgin Mary from right across the world, particularly in former Yugoslavia, Ireland. But Fatima is one of the most extraordinary examples for the following reason, is that we have a lot of actual, factual evidence to show that something amazing happened. The children had a series of meetings and they were given visions, secrets that they were told to take to the Holy Father, who, curiously enough, was then Pope Benedict the 15th. And they were told they could only reveal some of the secrets then, and others had to wait. One of the secrets was that there would be a time of huge change. There was a prediction of the Second World War. There were warnings about the evils of ism. There was a vision of hell given to the children. And the final secret's never been officially revealed by the Vatican, okay? But it's believed, through hints dropped by key Vatican staff, it's believed to talk of end times. Big stuff happening, massive crisis of global faith. Here and now, where we're living today. Now, you could say, well, yes, come on, any kid could claim they had a vision. Well, of course, the children understandably said, who will believe us? The local mayor tried to lock them up at one point. There was a lot of opposition because a lot of the information coming through was very anti-communist, and Portugal was not in a very pleasant regime at that time for spirituality. So Mary said, bring everybody here on October the 17th at noon, and I will perform a miracle that will leave you in no doubt that my words are real. So on October the 17th, the miracle of the sun occurred. Here is the window at the cathedral at Fatima now, commemorating what occurred. And allegedly, thousands upon thousands of people, more than 70,000, witnessed what they believed to be the sun performing this incredible series of maneuvers in the sky, spinning around very, very quickly, doing all sorts of aerial acrobatics, finally coming down like a falling leaf, and then swooping down very low over their heads. We know that this did occur because there are photographs of the event. There we see the thousands of people waiting out there for something to occur. It was very wet, by the way, extremely rainy day. And here's the interesting thing is that the object that they saw was also photographed. There it is. This was photographed by several people many miles away. So this was not just hypnosis. You can't just write it off as mass hypnosis. It was photographed. It was described as like an eclipse sun, and it did all these astonishing maneuvers. And of course, the crowd were terrified. They'd heard, that Mary had been speaking to these children. They believed this might even be the end of the world. Well, it wasn't the end of the world. The sun, which clearly it wasn't, or we might all have noticed it, the sun resumed its place in the sky. And one interesting thing here, both the people, and you can see from the umbrellas there how wet it was, and the ground, which had been sopping wet, as soon as that final light came over them, they were bone dry. And that has been described in many UFO encounters as well, this drying quality, heat. And the behavior of this light sounds suspiciously like UFO activity, whatever the hell that is. Now, you can argue that both ways. Was this the Virgin Mary? Was it something posing as the Virgin Mary to get people's attention? We don't know. But now we come to the interesting point about why I'm telling you about this. You see, the thing is, it's not a question of whether you believe in any of this prophecy. That doesn't really matter. The question is, if people in high places believe in it, people who are affecting your world, they're going to influence your life with the belief in these prophecies. Now, who is one of the key Vatican members of staff who over the years has spent many, many years poring over the evidence of Fatima and who concluded that it was genuine and it was a real prophecy? Guess who that might have been? Well, let me introduce you to Cardinal Ratzinger, better known to you today as the Pope. Pope Benedict the 16th. Interesting how he chose the name Benedict to echo his forebear who'd been there at the time of the Fatima prophecies. Now, what is interesting about this, of course, is that here we have a man who's massively influential in the world. He has the spiritual welfare of thousands of people all around the world in his hands, and he believes we are now entering end times. Because if you believe the Fatima prophecies, presumably that's what you will think. The official line from the Vatican is that the only thing in the third secret was a prediction of the assassination attempt on John Paul II in 1981. But actually, that is not believed by a lot of people because of the hint dropped by people, including Ratzinger, before he became the Pope. The hints were all about end times, not just an assassination attempt. So here we have a Pope that believes that something massive is about to occur, and he believes this through his spiritual beliefs. We don't know if these prophecies are meaningful, but he believes them, and he influences a lot of people. Now, who else can we think of that's in power, or at least supposedly, who also has very key religious beliefs? Good, gentlemen. The halo's good, isn't it? Believe it or not, that isn't Photoshop. He just had his head in front of the presidential seal at that moment. But it's rather apt. Now, I take Tony's point, absolutely, that George Bush would appear to be a puppet, but nonetheless, if you're president, you've got power. And even if it's just cosmetic, you've got influence of some kind, no matter how shadowy the hidden government behind the government may be, which we will come to shortly. Now, here's the thing, of course. You may remember in 2003, he addressed some Palestinian ministers. And he said the most extraordinary thing to them, heard by more than one person. And the extraordinary thing was that he said that God had told him to invade Iraq. And he used words like, God said to me, invade Iraq, so I invaded Iraq. God says this, and so I do it. So this was extraordinary. Now, this was played down by the White House, as I'm sure you can imagine. But people heard him say it, and it's pretty obvious. He does believe he is doing God's work. History is littered with leaders who believe they are doing the chosen will of God. The problem is, they can't all be right. And there he is, accusing the Islamic world of doing the same, but he's no different. Now, do you think, and we don't know this, did God really speak to George Bush in the night personally? Well, one likes to hope not, but I guess we're all equal. But is it more likely that actually that information came from this gentleman here? This is the one-time pastor, Ted Haggard. Ted Haggard was a major leading evangelical preacher for the last 20 years, and he was extremely influential in his teachings, and he's an end-timer, believes absolutely that we're coming to the day of judgment, that the second coming is about to occur. He, acknowledged, is not denied, had weekly phone calls to George Bush and other officials in the Bush administration, advising them on global policy. Think about this. Here's a man who believes that we're living in end times, day of judgment, advising somebody with his finger on the button of the machinery of war. It's kind of worrying, really, isn't it? This seems to be what's going on. And here's the thing, you see. Ted Haggard, I have to say, has been disgraced. There was a kind of sex and drug scandal. Anyway, that's beside the point. Guess somebody else who he also advised on occasion. Tony Blair also was advised by Ted Haggard. Of course, now we've seen recently Tony Blair, big religious conversion. He's now Catholic. He's now preaching how faith ought to be more important. How he squares that with the millions who've died in Iraq, I don't know. But that's for his conscience and not ours. This is an issue for me. And this is, say, where I differ from Tony. I respect his views. But to me, belief in the rapture, and the rapture is a relatively modern belief based on a few obscure references in the Bible that anybody who's very devout will be bodily lifted up into heaven and saved just before the massive earth changes get going down here. Okay, this is very widely held, even though it's very flimsy. It didn't really rise till the 1800s, this belief in the rapture. Well, Ted Haggard is a rapture person. So one can only presume that George Bush, a born-again Christian, also believes in the rapture. The Battle of Armageddon, the final battle of good against evil. To some people, not only is it a question of that it will be fought, but that it must be fought. And so therefore you have people in power who believe that it is their God-given duty to bring about the Battle of Armageddon. Now, if you believe in the rapture, you obviously want this to occur. This is a good thing. If you believe you are devout and that you will be saved, well, then you want the rapture. So if you think about it, every day which is a step closer to world peace is a step away from the rapture. Well, you don't want that, do you? So no matter what may be going on with oil and money and power for the sake of power, which of course is a massive part of all this, as you've already seen today, I think there must be a much stronger religious agenda going on as well. Now, you know, the world of conspiracy is full of finger-pointing, Zionism, Islamic fundamentalism, whateverism. Who the hell knows? Probably a mixture of them all. Okay, but there's a religious agenda, I think, underpinning some of this stuff that's going on now. And I think we ought to be very wary about not playing into their beliefs. Because it is only a belief. There's no proof that any of this is real or that it is real. But if you've got people in power who believe it is, then you've got an issue. Which brings us back to global conspiracy. How do we make sense of all this global agenda stuff? What the hell is really going on? And how can we identify areas very publicly for people so that they can latch on to the fact that their world is being taken away from them every day more and more, and their freedom is going down the drain as we speak because of seemingly an elite of people running the world for their own ends and not ours. And it makes me laugh how many people think that those in power have our best interests at heart. Because the world doesn't make any sense in that framework. It doesn't. It only begins to make sense when you realize maybe it's being run for somebody else's agenda. Now, people sometimes say, when you talk about this, and they say, look, this is amazing. Why isn't anybody talking about this in the mainstream? Then say, well, actually, people have tried. And they say, well, who? And you say, well, people like George Orwell, back in 1948. Tried to write a warning of what would happen if certain policies kept being implemented. There's George Orwell's face on an ID card. Everything that Orwell wrote is coming horribly true by the day. If you've never read 1984, go and read it. And as somebody on the internet said recently, George Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning. The Blair government, as was, seems to be implementing it as a blueprint. And I think there's truth to that. Now, ID cards, I mean, this is big. It's amazing how many people think ID cards is a good thing. The polls are generally coming out against it, but it's going soon the other way because people, when they're fearful, as you know, as David Icke later on will doubtless tell you, that's when people give their power away. And so terrorism and all this kind of thing, they think, well, it's a good thing. We all knew who they were. None of this could occur. But the problem with the ID card system currently being implemented is it is so rigid, if something goes wrong, you're in big trouble. And B, it's biometric. It will include all your DNA details, eye scans, God knows what. Eventually, it will all go onto one database. You will need that card for everything you do, everywhere you go. There will come a time, even just to get into a shop, a few bombs and a couple of Tesco's should bring this about neatly. You need your ID card to get on a train, ID card. To buy anything, to sell anything, ID card. And ID cards, as you can already see, is just the first stage in a bigger plan here. I don't know, did anybody see that BBC drama, The Last Enemy, a few weeks ago? Sunday nights. I'm astonished how few people watched it. You should have watched it. It was a brilliant dramatization of what's going to happen in an ID card world. Scary. And what happened to the character who finds himself becoming a subversive, like it or not, is that one day his ID card doesn't work. Government don't like what he's doing. Oh, no ID. He can't go anywhere. He can't get into any buildings. He can't travel. He can't buy any food. He's suddenly a social leper. He is an ex-member of the community. What a fantastically easy way to control people. If we all have to have ID to get around, what happens when that ID is suddenly deregistered? You are stuffed. And here's the thing. If these policies were being implemented by administrations we could trust, it might be all right. But sadly, history records that we can't trust these people. And they don't seem to have our best interests at heart. And herein lies the problem. How do we get round it? And will you get round it when microchips become the next stage of this game? And instead of an ID card, you have a little chip in your arm already pioneered. The police, I understand, in Britain are going for this soon. They're going to have little chips in them. Places in America have been trying this out, trialing it for a long time. Because soon it will be, you don't want all that fuss of a card, just have a little chip. swipe it on the barcode as you go in. And a lot of people will think that's a good thing. But of course, how do you know what the chip's going to do? And there's nowhere you could go. There's nowhere you could be where somebody somewhere out there wouldn't know where you were. You think the cameras are already a bad thing? Well, soon. Unlike in 1984, where poor old Winston Smith just managed to tuck round the corner of the Visi screen to read his subversive book. You won't even be able to do that when you've got a little chip in your wrist. And Orwell didn't see that coming. So again, people say, yeah, but why didn't anybody warn us about this? Well, hey, guess what? They did. Now, I include this in my talks. Indeed. I include this in my talks, generally, when I do the mysteries and cover-ups, okay? So I didn't put this in just to please David today. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. When you show this to the WI or whatever, what's the reaction when you show it? Laughter. Oh, David Icke. Oh, he was that nutter bloke, wasn't he? And he was on telly, and then he said he was God. That's what's stuck in the public mind. Now, you will know the story was much more than that. And that what David Icke did, in fact, was provide a massive service for our community here in Britain and eventually the globe by actually just trying to tell it like it was. And whether you go with the way he did it at the time or not is irrelevant. But here's the thing, that when you actually then start to point out to people, as I do in these talks, yes, but actually David Icke managed to predict very accurately exactly the world with control that we're now moving into. They all go strangely quiet. The War on Terror, 11-type event, electronic tagging, all of this, Icke was talking about this a long while back. And yeah, it was good that you applauded because he stood up for what he believed in and he faced the ridicule. And because of that, he's changed a lot of people, okay? And he has. And it's amazing how many people have tried to stop him. Before I came to this conference, I had a letter this week from somebody saying, he's a Nazi! He hates Jews. He says all Jews are reptiles. And you think, I think you've got something slightly wrong here, you know. The Nazi accusations, of course, were always a way to shut it up. Anybody who's read his books knows that's a complete load of bollocks, right? But it's amazing how that's been enabled to go around so that people believe that, and it's helped hold back the message that David and other people like him. There's lots of people working at the coalface, including Ian Crane here, who, by the way, is doing a massively fantastic job in trying this out to the mainstream. And he also deserves your applause. Applause for Ian Crane. But as far as the mainstream goes, here's their big problem with David Icke. And in many minds, it's a big one. The reptilian agenda is what some people think is why they can't take anything Paul David says seriously. And you'll be hearing about the reptilian agenda later on. Essentially, it just boils down to there may be an extraterrestrial gene that has been passed down through the generations, keeping an elite, a small club in power. Bloodlines maintained. Now, the thing is, you don't need to believe that the monarchy is really an extraterrestrial reptile to see that it's either way a metaphor for the same thing. Power is passed down. Bloodlines, dynasties are maintained. That's the way the world works. What's the big deal? And here's the interesting thing. Those same people often who reject utterly this crazy belief that the monarchy could be reptilian lizards are quite happy to believe everything that's in the Bible. And a good religious folk, and yet the Bible itself states categorically we all carry an extraterrestrial gene in us. You've heard of the Anunnaki, you've surely heard of the Nephilim. It's in the book of Genesis. Chapter 6, the race of giants from the stars, the sons of God. There's the quote. Go and read it. Genesis 6, verses 1 to 14. 1 to 4, beg your pardon. This is in the Bible. It states categorically that we were seeded by a race of giants from the stars. So what's the big deal? But this is the thing. It's all people pick and choose what they believe, and they don't like it when you point out the strange discrepancies. And they say, well, you're just weird. But look, it's in the Bible. Well, that's just symbolic. But then the next thing they'll take completely literally. So this is what we're dealing with. And there's other things in the Bible that seem to be very useful metaphors. This is the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, of course, was when mankind got a bit above himself, got very good at construction. We're building this tower to rival the works of God. And God, understandably, didn't really like this very much. So, according to the Bible, he struck down all the people working on the tower so that they were unable to speak the same language. And they found themselves all gabbling in different tongues, and they couldn't work together coherently. And so they had to all stop work on the tower and go off and find their own civilizations and create their own places around the rest of the world. Now, maybe that's, of course, a metaphor for all the ancient myths to do with things like Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. So many cultures believe there was once an ancient, fairly enlightened civilization that when it finally broke up through disaster or whatever, gave birth to various other civilizations around the world. And there are all sorts of links between cultures that are seemingly disparate. There's genetic links, there's links to do with what they build and what they believe, suggesting that once maybe we were all one enlightened civilization, and that these secrets, the mystic secrets, their beliefs, have been passed on down the generations. And, of course, this is now corny, but here it is on the dollar bill, evidence that these ancient beliefs affect our world today. And you heard Tony's take on this earlier on. So, in other words, we're living with secrets that have been passed down through secret societies. You heard Tony talking this morning about people like the Bilderbergers, Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, the Arty-Farty, whatever they are. Same secrets from the past carried through today and being used to dominate the global population. Okay? So we can see this very mainstream. And here's the thing, you see. People say, oh, come on. Well, what evidence is there that anybody's all gathering together, making secret decisions? It's nonsense. Well, here is an image from the Bohemia Club. The Bohemia Club was founded in the late 1800s in California. And it was a group of very successful businessmen, politicians, industrialists, influential business people, or men. And it was men back then, certainly. And here's the thing, that they used to carry out this odd little pageant in a place called Bohemian Grove every year. And they used to do this curious thing of sacrificing the effigy of a child to a stone owl, as you do. Yeah. And, this would be taken as a quaint little bit of Victoriana, they did weird things back then. But then, of course, as many of you sitting in here know already, this still goes on today. The cremation of care ceremony, as it's called, takes place every year in Bohemian Grove. And let's just put it like this. Okay, people do funny little pageants. In Lewes, they do massive bonfire things and put on weird costumes. But they admit it. It's out in the open. But this is weird because they don't say anything about it. Allegedly, very influential people, all the world leaders, your Dick Cheneys, your Tony Blairs, everybody, sooner or later has passed through Bohemian Grove. And around the campfires, maybe, where some of the decisions that are changing your world and taking away your freedoms somehow begin here. Now, when you say this to people, they say, load of rubbish. Come on, what evidence is there? Who ever discovered that? Well, here's the gentleman that helped popularize this more than anybody. Is he a wild conspiracy theorist? No. This is John Ronson, TV presenter and Guardian journalist. Now, whatever you think of John, he's had very strong views about 9/11 and all that. He's fascinated at least with why people believe in conspiracy theory. He's interested in why. And he was persuaded by Alex Jones, who is, of course, a very well-known conspiracy theorist in America, to break into the Bohemian Grove compound to see what was really going on there. And they did. And, of course, they went in, and John Ronson was astonished to find it was all true. And he made it a chapter in his best-selling book, Them. This is mainstream. It's never been denied. It just hasn't been ever reacted to. But he saw it with his own eyes. Now, John just kind of says, yeah, it's weird. I'll give you that. It's a bit odd, and it is a bit odd. This is what our leaders do on their holidays. Now, think about that, okay? This is what they're doing. And the thing is, if that kind of thing is going on behind our back and they won't admit it, that makes you question everything. it says that, well, maybe everything about the whole of our recent history could be a massive lie. And that's when you then get led into areas like this. Lunar conspiracy. It's a great one to get people chuckling. Oh, we never went to the moon. Yes, good one. Have another glass of wine, dear. Now, listen. The moon landing is on one level. You could say, well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, it's big. This is still held up as mankind's greatest achievement. Next year, it's the 40th anniversary. You're going to be hearing moon landings, all next summer. The thing is, though, right, this is a good example. We're expected to accept that we did go to the moon on very little evidence. Actually, on the tiniest evidence for believing in nearly anything. Here's the issue with them. Is that all we have to go on is three things. 1, the testimony of the astronauts. 2, moon rock. 3, the photographs. Now listen, people are known to lie sometimes, sadly, patriotic reasons or whatever, so testimony, it's very contradictory. There's all sorts of weird paradoxes and inconsistencies in the story, but put that aside. So you can't really accept that as absolute proof. Moon rock. That proves it, we went to the moon. Could have been taken by robot probes. And also, if you give somebody a rock and say, there you go, that's from the moon. Can you prove otherwise? Could be from anywhere. So you can't really take that. So what we have are the photographs. Now, this is a metaphor for the wider thing here. So mankind's greatest achievement, we're expected to accept the reality of this on tiny evidence. All we have are the photographs. So what if the photographs don't end up? And when you look at them, it's just kind of interesting. Here's the famous picture of Buzz Aldrin on the moon, taken by Neil Armstrong. Classic image. But immediately you notice some interesting things. First of all, he's standing in a pool of light. Can you see? There's a very bright spot there. And then the light falls off into darkness as you get towards the horizon. Well, that's a bit odd. This is sunlight. They claim they took no artificial lighting to the moon. Okay? So this is in sunlight. That should be even. If you photograph somebody standing on a beach with a big horizon, you won't see the horizon go dark. Right? It's got nothing to do with no atmosphere or anything. It should be uniformly lit. Here's another interesting thing. You can see the astronaut there's lit up beautifully. There's lots of detail. You can see it very clearly. But his shadow is jet black. Now, the thing is, if you expose the camera wide enough, the aperture, so that you could pick up this level of detail, that shadow should not be black. You should have an amount of of detail in the shadows, and you don't. Now, I am not an expert on moon landings, but I have had books of photography published, and I know a little bit about photography, and this doesn't add up unless they used artificial lighting. Now, they say they didn't. Let's have a look at one of the cameras that they used. Here's another classic picture, by the way, of an astronaut where he seems to have been filled in with light. Now, you might say, well, it's reflected light. Reflected light from the moon's surface. That's the official explanation. Well, the moon has the reflectivity of tarmac. You take a picture of a snowman with the sun behind it, right? Go away and try this one day. You'll see it casts a jet black shadow. The snowman in your photographs will also be black. It won't be lit up with reflected light. Snow reflects much more light than moon dust is ever going to do. There is the camera on his chest. And here's the thing, that they never looked through the viewfinders. To the chest, that was it. They never moved. And they just had very basic adjustments and went click, click, click. Now, if you walk around Top Nest today with a camera and went click, click, never looked through a viewfinder all day, how many perfect pictures are you going to get from that? You're going to get the odd, head cut off or whatever, even on a wide angle. Every single one of the NASA lunar photographs is perfect. Picture perfect. Okay? That is a bit weird. And here's another example. Here's a classic shot of the lunar lander. First of all, in none of any of the shots of the several missions is there the remotest crater, scorch mark, not even a disturbance of moon dust beneath that jet. And then you look at all the rockets they tested, huge thrust, thousands of pounds of thrust, throwing out incredible pressure. There's no evidence of that in any of these pictures, not even any dust on the feet. That aside, the sun is behind this. You can see the sun there behind it. This is jet black shadow. That is all lit up so you can see the detail. If you can see that level of detail there, you should also see the level there of detail in the shadows you can't. That's because something has lit the lunar lander up. There are so many problems. Now you might say, oh, what about the videos? We've all seen them bouncing around in zero gravity or low gravity. That surely ends the argument. Well, actually, if you run those images at normal speed, just speed it up to actually, it just looks like normal people waddling around. It's almost as if it's just been slowed down. Here's the thing, though, right? How can we put that to the test? Here's the famous picture of the jump salute. Astronaut leaping up and saluting. Very fine image. You can just behind him see a camera on a tripod there, and you can see their space underneath his feet. Okay, this was videoed at the same time, so we can therefore cross-reference it with the video taken from behind. And we immediately see some interesting anomalies. First of all, look at where the camera is in the original. There's no way it could have taken that image. That camera's around there somewhere. The flag hangs at a different angle. There's a flap clearly sticking up on the astronaut's pack, which doesn't show there, and it should. There's been all sorts of tests done. And in the video, you clearly see a puff of moon dust come up from beneath his boots. In the still shot, there's no moon dust visible at all. That was not taken at the same time. It's an anomaly. We could go on. Others say, right, some say, we went to the moon and the photographs are fake because they cocked them up, there were too many x-rays, radiation fogged the film, they had to show something. Well, maybe, but others have pointed out if you look at the radiation shielding they had on the graph, it was so thin they should all died of cancer within about a year of their return. None of the astronauts died of anything that seemed to be untowards, that wouldn't be normal. We could go on, we won't. If you want to look at this website, allist.com, there's a very good book out recently called One Small Step, which is worth reading, and of course Dark Moon by David Percy and Mary Bennett. What I'm using this here, I'm not trying to say we did or didn't go to the moon, I don't know. But I do know that there are anomalies in these photographs that suggest they were taken in studio conditions, which suggests somebody's trying to pull a fast one. Whatever the reality of whether we went to the moon or not, there's a truth not being told. And that, of course, then leads people to question absolutely everything. And now, especially more so, since the weapons of mass destruction debacle. The weapons of mass destruction lie, and it was a lie, and not a mistake, is the biggest mistake the Illuminati, or call them what you want, have ever made. Because a lot of people do not trust our leaders. Even in the mainstream, it's created massive seeds of doubt. Everybody knew we were going to war in Iraq for false reasons. There were massive protests, as some of you know, and we knew that the true story was not really being given. But nonetheless, we were assured there were weapons that could be deployed within 45 minutes, and they could affect the West. And so off the back of that, the Iraq war began. Even though, as you heard from Tony earlier on, gentlemen like Dr. David Kelly was saying, this is nonsense. First of all, the dossier, which all this information was based on, was actually based on an original student thesis placed on the internet about 8 years before, doctored, added to with a few sexy facts, and effectively written by Alistair Campbell and his crowd. When Dr. David Kelly said this dossier cannot be genuine, what happened to him? You know what happened to him. Suddenly found dead in the woods. Would you believe it? Suicide. Well, I'm lucky enough to live with a MP as my local MP down in Lewes in Sussex. Norman Baker stuck his neck out. You can disagree with his politics, right? Okay, but he stuck his neck out and said Kelly was murdered. And he's written a very interesting book called The Strange Death of Dr. David Kelly, read it, in which he categorically proves David Kelly was murdered. Now, you can disagree with who you think he, did it and whatever, but he was murdered. It was not suicide. The wounds were not deep enough. There was not enough blood. There was evidence that the body was moved. All sorts of anomalies that simply make no sense whatsoever if it was suicide. He was murdered because somebody wanted to shut him up. It's so obvious. You get a little bit too close and you have to go. And the BBC, of course, has been utterly neutered since, excuse me, BBC journalists, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to say this. Ever since this, it really won't say boo to a goose. And anybody who watched the conspiracy files on BBC Two about 9/11, did anybody see that? Would have seen the most ridiculous, appalling appalling and atrocious pack of lies and distortions, which they must have known were, because they don't want to lose the license fees, so they're going to toe the official line. And let's talk about 9/11 briefly, because I know you all know the basics. I know that most of you here probably don't believe the official story. But here's an important thing, that in the outside world, in the world of Rotary clubs and WI, they do. Okay? To a degree. But what I find interesting is that it doesn't take long to present a few interesting facts about 9/11 for people's opinions to shift. People don't tend to question what they're told. That's why nobody's looked at the moon landing photographs in any great detail over the years, because who would lie about such a big thing? But actually, since weapons of mass destruction, people are more willing to look. And when you point out the many, many anomalies of 9/11, they start to realize there is something wrong. And it doesn't take long to get them there. Let's just very briefly recap on some of the basics. The Pentagon. You know the deal. Where's the debris from an aeroplane? Where is there a hole big enough to have accommodated the aeroplane that they say crashed into it? There's no debris visible. The wall, which did not initially collapse, as you see in most later pictures, should have a great big gouge here where a 42-foot tail went through. It didn't. The hole is about 20 feet across with the wingspans a bit wider than that. The official story is that the wings vaporized on impact. And if you see the computer models, you just sort of see them melting into the infrastructure of the building. Now, we're just doing basics here. We could talk all day about the anomalies. Read the works of David Ray Griffin for the best roundup. Right? I can't recommend him enough. Just cut to the chase here, other things. Hanny Hanjour, who allegedly was at the controls of the aircraft that hit the Pentagon, was described even by his own flight instructor in America as barely capable of flying a light aircraft. And yet, the angle that plane came in on, which was about a few feet above the ground at 500 miles per hour, would have taken a genius pilot to have executed it down to that level. Everyone said that. A genius. Hanny Hanjour? I don't think so. So whatever hit the Pentagon wasn't the plane that got hijacked. What happened to the people on that plane? What happened to them? Endless speculation about that. We don't have time today. The towers. People then say, yeah, all right, well, maybe there's an anomaly at the Pentagon, but the towers, we all saw that on the telly. We know what happened. Unquestionable. Planes hit the towers, fire, very hot, weaken the infrastructure, they fell down. That makes sense. Because on one basic level, if you're not thinking about it, it does sort of make sense. But then, of course, it doesn't make sense. And you look at the way the tower fell, you know the story. It fell at free fall speed into its own footprint. As Tony showed you earlier on, there is clear evidence of demolition charges going off all the way down the length of the building to make sure that it came down. There is a picture of a tower block being demolished in Philadelphia, by the way. Interesting, isn't it? Rather similar. Demolition squibs. And here's some more shots showing the little puffs of smoke going all the way down the buildings. Somebody went in and laid charges to make sure that the maximum spectacle was achieved. No question about it. Now, some would say there is a question about it, but then when you say, well, hang on, buildings don't generally collapse due to fire. This is, of course, the example often given of the hotel in Madrid in 2005 that burnt for 24 hours, and bits of it fell in, but the tower didn't collapse. Until 9/11, no modern architecture building had ever collapsed due to fire. And then, of course, on 9/11, 3 buildings did. Because not just the Twin Towers, but, of course, Building 7 at the World Trade Center also came down. Most people outside of our kind of people circles don't know anything about Building 7. They've never heard of it. They don't know it fell down. And in the official 9/11 Commission report, guess how much space it warrants? None at all. It's not even mentioned. And yet, a building fell down that had never been hit by an aeroplane, only by a little bit of debris, and it fell down. Now, if buildings collapse this easily, they ought to have evacuated every building in Manhattan that very day. But of course they didn't, because somebody knows buildings don't generally do that. Look at the fires. Very few, okay, a couple of fires, a few floors. Mayor Giuliani had his by the way, the CIA had headquarters. The Enron scandal was being investigated from here. Well, lots of juicy, interesting papers, all lost. Would you believe it? And when you look at the building coming down, puffs of smoke, clearly demolition charges. Well, you know the score. We could go on, we won't. William Rodriguez, of course, is one of the key people that's been exposing the fact that he and his employees witnessed explosions going off inside the Twin Towers. And he knows because he was there, because, of course, he was the caretaker of the North Tower on the day of 9/11. He was hailed as a national hero. There he is, meeting Mr. Bush, who even there seems to have a glowing halo. William Rodriguez was a national hero, but when he and his employees tried to testify to the 9/11 Commission, they didn't want to know. They didn't want to know. It wasn't listed, and he was incensed, and now the world giving his side of the story. The fireman also described explosions going off inside the building. That's all now excised. When you see any TV programs about 9/11, have you noticed they never repeat that bit of the fireman saying, oh, it was like boom, 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 like explosives? Gone. Removed from the public record. Interesting, isn't it? And here, by the way, is Rodriguez with the next president of the United States. Maybe. We could say something about that, but we could be here all day talking about the different candidates. If you want a prediction, I think John McCain's going to get it. Because there's so much division between Hillary and Obama, whatever his name is, that people know that neither one of them's a popular choice. McCain, there from the start. Looks solid, reliable. If something big happens terrorist-wise this year, they'll go for the safe choice, and it will be McCain. So there, you've had a prediction. If I'm wrong, great. Or is it great? God. Right, let's not go through it. There are just a few reasons to doubt them. I'm not even going to read them. Most of you know them. If you don't know them, go and find out. Because it's not just a few anomalies. Every single thing is an anomaly. It does not add up. The official story cannot be true. Who perpetrated it, we don't know. But of course, what we do know is that somebody really benefited big time from that. You all know, surely, the Project for the New American Century, which was a sort of think tank created at the end of the 90s to try to find a way, how could America be made powerful in the world again? And what they said was, what they needed was, and there's the quote, a new Pearl Harbor. And then on the day of 9/11, George Bush described it as the new Pearl Harbor. Isn't that interesting? So it gave them the mandate to do everything we've seen since Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran probably next. And big time, and here's Osama bin Laden. Who knows? Was he a patsy? Was he and his men ever even involved? Don't know, but it ain't the full story, that's for sure. But here's the thing. We all know the world we've moved into since. We, in England, in particular, have suffered. Our liberties have been taken away day by day. Small print, legislations. In America, it was a Patriot Act. It's taken away our freedoms every single day. You know that our freedoms have been taken away because of the war on terror to keep us all safe. We are the most camera-bound society in the world. They estimate in England you're on camera an average of 300 times a day now. If you go outside of your house. That's bad. It won't matter soon with the microchips, of course. You know the agenda. Fear. Control. ID cards. We live in a world now where even baby milk could be a bomb. You can't fly with a bottle of water because it could the plane up. Even though the science behind that is extremely dodgy. And what's the other big thing being used to keep us in fear at the moment? Climate change. Our next speaker will be Peter Taylor, and he's going to show you how the global warming fears are based on very bad science. Whichever way you want to look at it, it's being misused. The fear of global warming, A, is misconceived, and B, it's being badly abused to create fear. Fear is being used to make us control each other. So we've now got people protesting about 4x4s, saying, oh, you didn't fly to Spain, did you? Whoa. Transition town. Any members here? Why aren't they here? One. Good. Thank you. You need to be getting out there saying, don't attack each other. Let's make this an all-embracing, not fear-based movement. Because we do need to learn to adapt. There are going to be problems. There'll be a food crisis. Transition town's a great idea in principle. But at the moment, there's a lot of finger pointing, certainly in Lewes, where I come from. And meanwhile, the real perpetrators carry on. The guilt has been laid on the little person. We're carrying the guilt. They carry on. Maybe because they know global warming is not what it appears to be. A few more little things and then the good news to end. There is some good news. My God, there is. By the way, health and safety, political correctness, we are held like that in straitjackets in our society at the moment. Political correctness, what's that other than stopping us saying what we believe? We can't even express ourselves. Health and safety, you can't do the silliest little thing anymore. Kiddies' playgrounds are so no risk now that slides are about that far off the floor. Ladies making tea. I speak in several, thousands of venues over the years probably. I have now had 3 nights where I've got there and there's been an announcement that they are no longer allowed to make tea on the premises because of health and safety. Can't even boil a kettle because they're so incapable that they must get official caterers in. And it's funny, but it ain't funny. This is the world we're living in. And of course, what's all this about? They're trying to crush the human spirit. Why? Codex Alimentarius is just the classic example of what they don't want is us being happy and empowered and healthy. What have we heard this morning? They're trying to take away your every opportunity to get yourself to be tip-top. Why? It's almost as if they want to keep us unhealthy, they want to keep us unhappy, controlled. Could it be that somebody really thinks something's about to get out of hand? The Rex 84 program has seen a series of hundreds of prison camps being built in America, and allegedly there are some over here. They're empty. We don't know who they're for. The official story is they're there for an incursion of Mexican immigrants. Blimey. Each one takes 20,000 people. Could it be that they're expecting something big to happen? Tomorrow you will hear from Jeff Stray, who will tell you about the 2012 prophecies. The belief in religious prophecy that we discussed earlier in this presentation, I believe, is key. But that may be based in a knowledge of ancient prophecies, the Maya prophecies, other prophecies, and calendrical cycles, time cycles, which all seem to say when this time cycle comes around, something big happens to our world. And 2012, beginning largely on the 21st of December 2012, is when one of the ancient time cycles stops and begins again. And lots of people believe big things are going to happen. And Jeff will be telling you about that this morning. Here's the thing, because I know we've got to close, right? And close with some positive slides. Here's the thing. If you're in control of the world and you've had all your nice little plans building up all this time to keep us all in our place, if there's a huge global upset, if, as some people believe, we all become telepathic and very empowered, bloody hell, they don't want that. They've got to stay in power. That's why they have to control us, perhaps, to keep us in our place, so that if things go belly up with the world, they stay on top, because they're afraid of us. Okay? And if you do want to know about 2012 prophecies, I urge you to read Beyond 2012 by Jeff, because it will give you a very unbiased view of all the prophecies. Now listen, we're running short on time here. Peter's about to tell you about climate change. The sun is more active than it's been in 1,000 years. There are solar cycles affecting our world. It's not all greenhouse gases. It's being used as a tool of control. What can we do? The 100th monkey is a belief that when enough members of a species take on the same attribute at the same time, it miraculously reaches critical mass, only at something like 10%. And that knowledge is transmitted to the whole species. There's a lot of evidence for this. Go and look this up. There's no time to go into it now. Global Consciousness Project. Princeton University has even developed computers that can detect ripples in the collective consciousness field, it would seem. It seems to say that all our minds are linked, and when we focus our minds on the same thing at the same time, you get change. Do you need historical proof? Look at how often change comes when enough people get up and say no. GM foods, they're creeping in the back door now, but they've been held back massively by protests. The Iraq war wasn't stopped by the protests, but if we hadn't all gone out on the streets, they would have been bombing Iran 2 years ago, in my opinion. The Real Ale Society. Sounds stupid, but a lot of breweries have been going down the pan because people have stood up for local brews and said, hey, we don't want your Green King muck or whatever. We want the local brew. And they've saved it. Why? Because people stand up and say, no, we've had enough. Want some examples? The Berlin Wall. Now, you can think what you want about the political machinations behind it, but at the end of the day, there was suddenly a collective will, enough. And who would have thought that could have come down so quickly? Big change happens when you get on your feet. Suffragettes, ladies, you can vote. Once you couldn't. And once people threw themselves under horses to make their point. And as Philip Day last night said, you might have to stick your head above the parapet. And we are terrible as a country for not wanting to get involved. We all want to stay cozy, but life's not cozy. And one day soon, I think we're going to realize that. Nelson Mandela, question his politics if you want. Was he a terrorist or not? I don't know. But who would ever have thought that he would have become the president of South Africa? Big chums when you least expect it. Solidarity in Poland. They fought the Soviet oppressors and they changed the whole country around. Because enough people said, no, bollocks to this. We've had enough. And you need to do that. Live Aid. The governments weren't doing enough. So a bunch of people said, right, we'll do it. And look what happened. You can be cynical about charity concerts, but there was an energy to it that was very real and very positive. The Orange Revolution in Ukraine. A whole bunch of people said that was a rigged election. We're not going home until you have a recount or whatever. And the troops thought about opening fire and thought, all right, maybe not. And they got change. Now, okay, that didn't work in Tiananmen Square a few years back. It didn't work in Tibet a couple of months back. But it will do one day. And when you look at places like Burma, you see examples like Aung San Suu Kyi, who is the legally elected leader of Burma. They keep her under house arrest, but she never wavers from her belief that she will lead her people to freedom. They're scared of her. These people, the Illuminati, call them what you will, are scared of us. That's why they're trying to control us. Oh, there's one more example, by the way. Who would ever have thought that Ian Paisley and Jerry Adams would sit down together? Now, be as cynical as you want. The fact is, you could never have thought that could happen. And some people say, how can we do this? How can we fight the global agenda? Okay? Well, it's very simple. You stand up and you be counted. And I want to end with a quote from Gandhi, because this is a very useful quote. And Gandhi said this: when I despair, I remember that all through history, the ways of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers. For a time, they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Remember that. Always. Now, I'm not going to disagree with Gandhi, right? We are puppets of international banking, of Illuminati people, conspiracies. Do you know why we are? Because we let them do it. And if we all stood up as one and said, no way, no more, it would end. We are powerful beings. They know it. Believe that. So it's very depressing hearing all this difficult stuff this weekend, but you must also believe that you can change it. We're only small, but the 100th monkey syndrome means you only need to get to enough of the population, and mysteriously, critical mass is reached. I believe we can make a difference to everything that's going on. If you stop believing that, you might as well go home now. I hope that you're staying here because you believe that just by spreading awareness even, it's the first step towards making a difference. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.